Good morning, everybody. It's Thursday. Yes, Thursday all day, and lovely to see you. And thank you for joining us for our Bible reading for this morning. Friends, as I say, we are in the sharp end now of the Gospel of John. To set the scene, Jesus has been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane on Maundy Thursday evening. He'd been after the Last Supper. He'd been taken to Annas and then Caiaphas' house, the high priest's house, where he'd basically been all night. Now we reach Good Friday morning. It's early in the morning because they couldn't do much overnight, and this is when the scene moves to Pontius Pilate's place. So without further ado, here we go. It's John's Gospel, chapter 18, and I'm starting to read at verse 28. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement, so as to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusations do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." They did this to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would keep fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. Anyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "And I found no case against him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" But they shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a bandit. Now then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, and the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They dressed him in the purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and striking him on the face. Pilate went out to him and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you, so you let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You'd have no power over me, except it had been given you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself up against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside, sat on the judge's bench at the place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was a day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." And he handed him over to them to be crucified. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, a lot in this reading here. So essentially, they take Jesus from the high priest's house. They take him to Pilate's house. It's first thing in the morning, and then there's a conversation between Jesus and Pilate. And then Pilate tries really hard to there's like a byplay between Jesus and Pilate. And Pilate clearly tries very hard at various times to get Jesus released, but the crowd are having none of it. and that's the trial of Jesus. And it's a difficult story to read, really, in lots of ways. And part of me, every time I read it, still wishes he'd get off, but of course he doesn't, because he had to die for us and for the world. But in this, there are some enormous ironies, which I just want to run past you, which you may not have considered before. The Jews asked him, they said, "Do you want me to release?" And the Jews say, "Can you release us Barabbas?" Now, Barabbas was a well-known bandit. He's somebody who's a murderer. He killed people in a rebellion. He may have been a bit. Some of that may have made him popular for some people. But irrespective of how bad he was, I think the lovely irony, the interesting irony with Barabbas, is that the word Barabbas means Bar Abbas. Bar means in Hebrew, it means son of. Abba means father. So Barabbas is son of the father. And the irony is, of course, you have Barabbas and you have the son of the father, and you also have Jesus, of course, who is the son of the father. And the irony, of course, being that the Barabbas, the one son of the father, was released so that the other son of the father had to die. So Jesus died in Barabbas's place. So one son of the father died so that the other son of the father could be released. And Barabbas must have thought, his time had come. He'd been caught red-handed. He knew he was guilty, and he must have thought his chips were out. That was it. And one thing about that film, The Passion of the Christ, that does really well is Barabbas kind of runs halfway down, having been released totally unexpectedly, thinking, sure, I'm never going to get out of that one. And yet, Christmas had come early. Jesus had died in his place. One son of the Father, Jesus, son of the Father, had died for him. Now, one thing that we all have in common with Barabbas is that we all have, even if we had at some point, even if we haven't anymore, our father. We're all children of a father. We've all had a father at some point in our lives. So in a sense, we are all Barabbas. And we can all say that Jesus died so that we can have life. So one of the first irony is that one Barabbas, Barabbas, the son of the father, was set free despite being guilty by the other son of the father, who is Jesus. And we can say the same. So that's the first kind of irony. The second thing is they mocked Jesus. The soldiers mocked Jesus as their king. And they put a purple robe on him, and they put a crown of thorns on his head, and they mock him, and they tease him, and they call him King of the Jews, and so on and so on and so on. The irony, of course, is that Jesus really was the king, and is the King of the Jews. They were mocking him and teasing him as a sort of, putting royal things on his head. But the irony, of course, is that Jesus really is the king. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He really genuinely is that. So when they were teasing him and calling him the King of the Jews, and look, here is your king, and that sort of stuff, the irony is, of course, that he really was and really is. So there's kind of a massive irony there. But then later on, he goes back to Pilate. Pilate's trying ever so hard, you get the impression, to release Jesus. And Pilate is just to have this conversation going, and Pilate just doesn't get it, what is truth. And Pilate, kind of says to Jesus at one point, "Do you not know that I have power to crucify you or to set you free?" Pilate is just not getting this at all. He says, "Do you not know that I have the power?" And Jesus says, "The only power you have is from above. Do you not see that?" And Pilate clearly thinks that he's the powerful one in this situation, but ironically, Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he really does have the power. Jesus is Lord. He's the Son of God. Ironically, God made heaven and earth, and all things were made through Jesus, and without him was not anything made that was made, as John says in John chapter 1. The irony is that, Pilate thinks he's the powerful one, but ironically, Jesus is the powerful one, and I think that's fascinating. But the fourth and final irony is kind of the way the accusers talk against themselves, and they do some strange things. And in the end, they fight. If you hear the crowd, who are these Jewish people sort of banging on about, we have no king but Caesar. They're so desperate to get rid of Jesus, they're prepared to say even that, which is against everything that they kind of stand for. So they're so keen, they're so angry, they're so keen to get rid of Jesus, they turn it against themselves, against everything they believe in. to try and get rid of him. So, in the end, Jesus is handed over by Pilate to be crucified. But there are some real ironies in here which I've certainly placed for reflection. And do feel free to read the reading again because it's amazing. Firstly, that Jesus, the real Son of the Father, died so that the other Son of the Father, Barabbas, can be set free. And he died for us as well. Secondly, that when they teased him and mocked him as the king, he really was and really is the king, ironically. Thirdly, Pilate thought he was the powerful one. He's saying, do you not know that I have power to crucify you? And Jesus says, the only power you have is power from above. And rulers to this day could do with remembering that. And finally, that his accusers were so keen to get rid of Jesus that they turned against themselves, turned on each other, and in the end went against everything they believe in, because that's how angry they were. But Jesus was handed over to be crucified. He gave his life so that we can have life today. And as I said about Barabbas earlier, one son of the Father died so the other son of the Father can have life. And Jesus died so that we can have life too. Such is what he did. Such was his love. And such